Albert, how was your morning?
It was good. It was fine. I woke up and then the morning was productive, I think. Yes, productive.
That took 8 seconds to describe a morning.
I know, because while I was speaking, I was also thinking, is good too vague? Should I say something more specific? Is productive the right word? Should I have said quite productive or just productive? And while I was having all of those conversations with myself about the words, I was also supposed to be producing the words at the same time.
Two processes simultaneously competing for the same cognitive space.
And the speaking lost. The thinking won, which is the opposite of what I wanted.
That is overthinking, and it is different from the freeze, though they are related. The freeze is a sudden shutdown. Overthinking is a constant low-level interference, a running commentary on your own speech that slows everything down, makes everything feel uncertain, and produces language that sounds hesitant even when the grammar is correct.
And the commentary is the problem, not the language.
The language is often fine. The commentary is what is making it feel not fine.
I'm Albert.
I'm Mary. LeapTalk English, B2 level, real conversation. Today, how to speak English without overthinking, what overthinking actually is, why it happens to English speakers specifically, and the concrete techniques that quiet the commentary so the language can just come. Word tour at the end, 8 words. Stay. Quick comment question. What do you overthink most when speaking English? The words? The grammar? Whether the other person understood? Tell us in the comments.
Let's get into it.
Mary, can we start by
Actually showing what overthinking sounds like versus what fluent speech sounds like, because I think the contrast is the clearest way to understand what we are talking about.
Yes, perfect. Albert, tell me about something you enjoy. Don't think, just go.
I immediately said, I really love cooking, especially on weekends when there is no rush. I like making things that take a long time, slow things, braises, stews, things where you do a lot at the beginning and then you just leave it. And the smell changes through the afternoon, and by the time it is ready, the whole thing has become something different from what you put in.
40 seconds. No hesitation, completely natural.
Because I was not thinking about the English, I was thinking about the cooking.
Now, tell me about something at work, something complicated.
At work, I have been working on a project that is quite complex in terms of the number of stakeholders involved, and I have had to navigate various perspectives. And
what happened?
The moment the subject became professional, something in me activated, a monitor, a voice that started checking everything. Is stakeholders the right word here? Did I use navigate correctly? Is this sentence going to be grammatically correct by the time I reach the end of it?
And the monitor consumed the fluency.
Completely. The cooking story had no monitor. The work story had a very loud one.
And this is the pattern. The monitor, the overthinking voice, is louder in situations that feel higher stakes, professional contexts, new conversations, topics where you feel less certain of your English, anywhere that judgment feels possible.
So the overthinking is not really about the language, it is about the perceived stakes.
The perceived stakes raise the monitor, and the monitor interferes with the retrieval, and the retrieval slows and the language suffers. And the suffering language seems to confirm that the stakes were right to be high, and the monitor gets louder, the same loop as the freeze, but slower and more constant.
So what breaks the loop? Because naming it is useful, but I want the practical version immediately.
First technique, and I want to demonstrate this before explaining it. Albert, say the first 10 words that come into your head right now. No thinking, just words.
Fast. Coffee. Window. Thursday. Blue. Complicated. Sandwich. Running. Quiet. Heavy. 17.
How long did that take?
3 seconds, maybe?
Were you monitoring? Were you checking whether those were the right words?
No, there were no right words. I just produced.
That state, the state of production without monitoring, is what you are aiming for in speaking, and the technique that accesses it is called output without review. You commit to speaking for a set time, 30 seconds, 1 minute, without stopping to check anything. No pausing mid-sentence to evaluate, no going back to correct, no internal commentary allowed. You just output, whatever English comes, imperfect, ongoing.
And what you said is still coherent, still meaningful, even without the monitoring.
Almost always. because the monitoring is not actually improving the output, it is slowing it. Removing the monitoring reveals that the English is mostly fine without it.
Show me what output without review sounds like on a real topic, a complex one.
Okay, topic, why cities are changing. Timer starts now. Cities are changing because people want different things from them now. Not just somewhere to live and work, but somewhere that feels like a community, I suppose. And because remote work changed where people can live, there's this pressure on cities to justify themselves, to be worth the cost, worth the crowding, worth the noise. And some cities are managing that. London, I think, Amsterdam, and some are not, and you can see it in who is leaving and who is staying. The question is whether the city is offering something you cannot get somewhere quieter and cheaper.
30 seconds, no hesitation, not one correction.
And I was not checking any of it. I was thinking about cities, not about my grammar.
So the technique is to move the attention from the language to the content.
That is the core of it. When your attention is genuinely on the content, the idea, the image, the story, the language serves it automatically. When your attention is on the language becomes the subject, and language processing language is an overload.
So second technique, because I know there are people who will hear output without review and think, yes, but what if I make an error?
The error fear. This is one of the most important things to address directly because it is the engine of the overthinking monitor in most people.
So let's address it directly. What actually happens when you make a grammatical error in English?
In most real conversations, nothing. The listener does not stop you, they do not correct you, they follow the meaning, they continue. The conversation goes on, the error passes, unregistered.
Because the listener is following meaning, not auditing grammar.
Right. We established this in the freeze episode. Listeners are not transcripts, they are meaning followers. A grammatical error that does not disrupt the meaning, which most errors do not, is simply not noticed.
And when an error does disrupt the meaning?
Then, and only then, the listener signals confusion. They ask for clarification. They say, sorry, did you mean X or Y? And you clarify, and the conversation continues. The error is corrected through communication, not through pre-speech monitoring.
So the monitor is trying to prevent something that either does not happen, errors that go unnoticed, or something that has its own natural correction mechanism, errors that cause confusion.
In both cases, the monitor is solving a problem that does not need its solution, and the cost of the solution, slowed, hesitant, unnatural speech, is higher than the cost of the problem it is preventing.
So the error fear is a bad trade.
A very bad trade. And internalizing this, genuinely believing it, not just understanding it intellectually, is one of the biggest unlocks in speaking development, because the monitor runs on the error fear. Remove the fuel and the monitor quiets. How do you actually internalize it rather than just knowing it? Experience. Deliberate exposure to the reality that errors do not cause the disasters the monitor predicts. Go into conversations with the deliberate intention of not self-correcting. Let the errors go and observe, actually observe, whether the conversation breaks down, whether the other person reacts, whether the feared consequence materializes.
And it almost never does.
Almost never. And each conversation where the feared consequence does not materializes is weakening the error fear, gathering evidence against the monitor's predictions, until eventually the predictions lose credibility and the monitor quiets.
Third technique, and this one is one I have been using personally, and it has been remarkable.
Tell me.
The content anchor. Before I speak, particularly before a conversation I know is coming, I anchor myself to the content, not the language, the content. I think about what I actually want to say, the idea, the story, the feeling, not how to say it in English, just what.
And then when the conversation starts, the English serves the content that is already active, rather than the English and the content being activated simultaneously.
And the difference is significant because when I anchor to the content first, the English arrives in service of something. It has a purpose. And purposeful language is faster and more natural than language that is also simultaneously figuring out what it is for.
Show me the difference. Say something with no content anchor. Just produce a sentence about anything. Cold.
The weather has been unusual recently.
Now anchor to a real thought first, something you genuinely think or feel about the weather. Take 2 seconds internally.
2-second pause, then I have noticed that I plan my whole day differently depending on whether there is going to be sun, and that feels slightly embarrassing, like a human being should be more resilient than the weather, but the sun arrives and the whole day changes shape.
Same topic, completely different quality of language.
Because the second one came from somewhere, there was a real thought, and the language followed the thought rather than searching for a thought at the same time as searching for the language.
Content first, language second, every time.
Fourth technique, reducing the stakes in your own mind. Because we said the monitor is louder when perceived stakes are higher. So what lowers the perceived stakes?
Reframing the purpose of the conversation. Most people, consciously or not, experience English conversations as tests, as evaluations, as moments where they are being assessed and judged. And that framing makes the stakes feel high because the consequence of speaking badly is judgment, social consequence.
And the reframe is?
A conversation is an exchange, not a performance. The other person is not your examiner. They are a participant in a shared exchange. And their goal, in almost every conversation, is not to evaluate your English. It is to communicate, to be understood, and to understand.
Which is the same goal you have.
Which is the same goal you have. And when two people share the same goal, communication, the means of reaching it are flexible. Imperfect language is fine, as long as the communication is happening.
So the reframe is from I am performing for an audience to I am communicating with a partner.
And it sounds simple, and it is simple, and it is also something you have to consciously practice because the test framing is deeply conditioned by years of language classes where you were literally being evaluated, by exams, by corrections, by every moment a teacher underlined an error.
So the brain learned English production means being assessed.
And unlearning that requires deliberately practicing the exchange framing. In every conversation, however briefly, remind yourself before you speak. This is an exchange, not a test. We are both here to communicate.
And then speak.
And then speak, with the monitor slightly quieter because the stakes are slightly lower. And each conversation where the exchange framing holds, where communication happens despite imperfection, weakens the test framing a little more.
Fifth technique, slowing down without stopping.
This one is underused and very effective because a lot of overthinking happens at high speaking speed. The faster you try to speak, the more the monitor races to keep up, and the racing monitor is louder than the slow one.
So slowing the speech slows the monitor.
Yes, and there is a specific way to slow speech that does not make it sound hesitant, that sounds considered, deliberate, even authoritative.
What is the difference between slow speech that sounds hesitant and slow speech that sounds deliberate?
Pausing. Where you pause. Hesitant speech pauses inside words and inside phrases, in the middle of a thought. Deliberate speech pauses between thoughts, at the natural boundaries, after a complete idea, before a new one.
So the pause is a full stop, not a stammer.
Exactly. The most important thing is probably, to be honest. That sounds hesitant, pauses inside the ideas, versus the most important thing is probably to be honest. And honesty is harder in some conversations than others, but it is almost always worth it. Pauses between complete thoughts sounds like someone who thinks carefully before they speak.
Which is a quality, not a weakness.
The person who speaks quickly and fills every gap with sound, who never pauses, often sounds less considered than the person who takes a breath between ideas, because the breath signals that something worth saying is coming, and that the speaker knows it.
And the slower pace reduces the overthinking because there's more space between thoughts, space that does not need to be filled immediately, space that the monitor has less opportunity to colonize.
Give yourself the space. The conversation can hold it. The other person can hold it. And in that space, the next thought arrives in English without being chased. Second word, monitor. As a noun in language learning, the monitor is the internal system that checks language production for errors and correctness. A monitor that is too active in speech slows fluency and creates overthinking.
For example, her monitor was so active that every sentence was reviewed 3 times before leaving her mouth, which made her English technically correct and completely unnatural. Or, turning the monitor down in conversation, not off, just down, is one of the most practical things a speaker can do for their fluency. Repeat, monitor, monitor.
Next, interference. Interference means the disruption of one process by another. In language, it is when the monitoring or evaluating process disrupts the producing process, slowing or blocking fluent speech.
For example, the grammar check was creating interference. Every time she started a sentence, the checking process interrupted the producing process and the sentence lost momentum. Or, reducing interference is not about being less careful. It is about choosing when to be careful and when to let the language flow. Repeat, interference.
Interference.
Next, fluent. Fluent means smooth and natural in production, without hesitation, without excessive monitoring, without the sense of effort. Fluency is the quality that overthinking most directly destroys.
For example, she was grammatically accurate but not fluent. Every sentence arrived correctly but slowly, heavily, as if it had been constructed rather than spoken. Or, fluency is not the absence of errors. It is the presence of flow, the sense that the language is moving forward without friction.
Fluent.
Next, output. Output is produced language, the English that comes out of your mouth or onto the page. Output without review means speaking without stopping to check. Output is the thing the monitor interferes with.
For example, the exercise was simple: 30 seconds of continuous output. No pausing, no self-correction, no review, just speaking. Or, increasing your output volume, the total amount of English you produce, is one of the fastest routes to reducing overthinking, because volume builds trust in the language that arrives. Repeat, output.
Output.
Next, anchor. We covered this in part 2 of the Thinking in English series, but here it means specifically the content anchor, the real thought or idea that the language is serving. Anchoring to content before speaking reduces overthinking, because the language has a purpose to follow.
For example, she anchored to her idea before speaking, spent 2 seconds knowing what she actually wanted to say, and the English arrived in service of something real rather than searching for something to say. Or, the content anchor is the difference between language that flows from thought and language that searches for it simultaneously. Repeat, anchor, anchor.
Next, deliberate. Deliberate means done with conscious intention, chosen and controlled rather than accidental. Deliberate practice means practicing specific skills on purpose. Deliberate pausing means choosing where to pause rather than pausing accidentally.
For example, the slow, deliberate pause between her sentences made her sound considered and confident, not uncertain, because the pause came at the right moment. Or, deliberate practice of the content anchor, consciously activating the idea before speaking, builds the habit until it becomes automatic.
Repeat, deliberate.
Deliberate.
And our final word, conditioned. Conditioned means trained through repeated experience to respond in a particular way, a behavior or belief that was learned through exposure rather than chosen deliberately.
For example, she had been conditioned by years of language exams to experience English production as being evaluated, and that conditioning was driving the monitor even in casual conversations. Or, conditioning can be undone, but it requires deliberate repeated experience of a different reality, not just understanding that the old pattern was unhelpful. Repeat, conditioned. Conditioned. 8 words: monitor, interference, fluent, output, anchor, deliberate, reframe, conditioned. All of them describe something real about the overthinking cycle and how to break it.
Challenge before we close. Your next English conversation, anyone, pick one technique from today and apply it, just one. Either the content anchor, 2 seconds of knowing what you want to say before you say it, or the output without review, 30 seconds of speaking without stopping to check, or the reframe. This is an exchange, not a test.
One technique, one conversation. And notice, not whether your English was perfect, whether the overthinking was quieter.
Because quieter overthinking is the win. The fluency follows from there.
I'm Albert.
I'm Maury. See you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.